Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for all of your hard work for a significant period of time in addressing, I think, one of the greatest challenges that cities across the country face, and that is making our communities safe, not just in a temporary period, but for lasting peace. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. We are honored to be recognized by the Violence Prevention Index. And as you heard from Greg, joining me in this effort also is a true champion of community safety, and that is our beloved Congresswoman, Robin Kelly, who has done so much over the years. In particular, her imprint on community safety is going to be felt by the bipartisan legislation that recently was signed by the president. Two of her initiatives, one on gun trafficking and the other on straw purchasing, are now the law of the land, and we look to take advantage of the years of hard work that she put into this effort. So thank you, Congresswoman Kelly. Also joining me is Community Safety Coordination Center Director Tamara Mahal and Ready Senior Director Jorge Matos. Like every big city in the U.S., Chicago has decades-long struggle with violence. This violence is rooted in decades of systemic racism, as well as disinvestment in our communities. To combat this, we have taken innovative steps to address both the immediate and long-term consequences of violent crime. From the beginning of my administration, we took a root cause analysis of the problems related to violence and violence prevention. This approach of not looking just at the symptoms and the manifestations of violence, but the actual causes. And that compelled us to take a whole of government approach to violence, meaning every single department, not just the police, view their work through a community safety lens. Last year, we marshaled and focused this approach through the launch of the Community Safety Coordination Center, or CSCC. The CSCC institutes a big picture, holistic collaboration between government agencies and community members to investigate, to address the root causes of violence, including trauma, lack of opportunity, and community blight. All of the things that we know are at the root of the violence that too many communities have been experiencing literally for decades. Now, nearly 1 year later, we are seeing that our whole of government approach yield dividends. As of yesterday, for example, year over year, shootings are down 18%. And thankfully, homicides are also down 18%. And while our shared and continued fight has to continue, it is important for us to note the progress that has been made. We are grateful that our collective efforts are being nationally recognized. The Violence Prevention Index assessed and ranked 50 U.S. cities with the highest rates of gun violence in 2021 based on the following criteria: intervention and risk factor reduction, addressing the root causes of violence, and local offices of violence prevention. And thanks to our collective violence reduction work and the strengths of our public safety ecosystem, and when I say our, I want to be clear, it's not just city government, it's our partners in community, it's law enforcement, it is literally a whole of city approach. Chicago was able to score 75 out of 100 points on this index. And we rank third among 50 U.S. cities for violence prevention programs, services, and policies. And this, to us, is a very big deal, and we are grateful for the recognition. This important validation that our collaborative, strategic, and hyperlocal approach to violence is working makes us know that we are headed in the right direction. We are moving. We'll continue to make the investments that are necessary to bring lasting impacts in our communities. And to be clear, no one's taking a victory lap here, or to say that we have all the answers. We know that we have many, many more miles to travel on our journey. And we believe that one shooting, one homicide is one too many. However, this is an important evaluation of the strengths of our overall strategy and our continued opportunities to make progress. Now, allow me to break down some of the strategies that we've been employing that I think has helped us earn this ranking. For starters, The city has significantly increased violence prevention funding over the time of my administration, more than any other mayoral administration in the history of our city. We fund street outreach, victim services, interventions for justice-involved youth, at-risk youth, and reentry and supportive services. All of these things are part of the $52 million annual budget for violence intervention. Now, on top of our city's $1.4 billion investment through Invest Southwest in historically disadvantaged neighborhoods, we have also invested over $400 million of federal funding to address community blight, bring economic development, and foster broader community safety efforts. Again, all of our community-driven violence prevention work is coordinated through the CSCC, where we address the needs of each unique community uniquely. Furthermore, we center violence reduction programming at the heart of the public health framework. That means focusing on people and place-based strategies and recognizing the depth of trauma, the need for meaningful reductions in poverty, and listening to the community about what it will take to make their communities safe. So aside from economic investments and affordable housing options, we created green spaces, cleared vacant lots, and we plan to plant over 75,000 trees over the next 5 years. Why are we doing these things? Not only do we know that these make sense from the data about communities that are safe, but aesthetically that makes a huge difference in the life of these communities as well. We've also increased funding tenfold for mental health resources and expanded neighborhood options to 50+ neighborhoods out of our 77, and we will reach all 77 neighborhoods with new mental health community-based supports by the end of this year. We increased funding to reach and support those with substance abuse addictions. And we've also piloted several models of alternative response to people in crisis. As an example, the Chicago Department of Public Health helped develop crisis responses to promote healing and prevent recurrences for our residents who need mental health services, victim services, gender-based violence services, or sobering centers. We launched the Crisis Assistance Response and Engagement Program, consisting of mental health emergency teams to de-escalate emergencies and provide follow-up treatment for people who are in crisis. We are supporting other at-risk individuals across many city departments and agencies, like the Department of Family and Support Services, who supports at-risk youth through programs like One Summer Chicago. This program connects multiple city departments, community-based organizations, and companies to offer over 24,000 employment and internship opportunities for youth and young adults. And similarly, Choose to Change, one of the most phenomenal programs helping vulnerable and at-risk youth that I am aware of across the country. This is centered in Chicago Public Schools. It is a collaborative 6-month intervention program that offers intensive wraparound and professional mentoring that focuses on a young person's needs with trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy. In addition to supporting those most at risk of violence, we also have a comprehensive array of programming that ensures people stay on the right path to prosperity and security. This includes hiring the city's first ever reentry coordinator who manages the Interagency Reentry Council. The council is earmarked with $13 million for reentry services this year that will serve formerly incarcerated individuals and transform Chicago into a national leader for being a second chance city. And in my view, you cannot have a serious conversation about community safety unless you are accounting for and supporting those who are returning from incarceration. These are just some of the examples of our whole of city, whole of government approach to violence prevention that is rooted in public health and evidence-based programs. We know that every department has a role to play, wrapping our arms around our communities and reducing gun violence. That's why the CSCC leads the way with coordination, working with community members, faith leaders, business leaders, and so many others across our city. Progress on violence can be slow, and at times it can be frustrating. But we're working on it day in, day out, and we are seeing the fruits of those labors. So with that, it is my great pleasure to welcome up a champion for our city on a national level, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. You can clap for her.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's an honor to be here. Congratulations to you and staff and the city. And Greg, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. As you've heard, we're here today to highlight that Chicago has been ranked one of the top cities in the nation for achieving the broadest range of violence prevention programs and policies. And I'm so happy there's something good to report, because we always tend to hear the negative. So hopefully we're shouting this out loud. The City Violence Prevention Index, or VPI scorecard, is the Community Justice Action Fund's inaugural report on the top American cities who are acting to prevent gun violence. Like many of the folks up here, I've been working on this issue for quite a long time. Along the way, we've had our hearts broken over and over again by the terrible gun violence that occurs not only in Chicagoland, but across this country. We rightly spend a lot of time focusing on the victims and survivors, on trying to figure out why gun violence occurs and how we can stop it. To be honest, this is wearying work, and there are some days when a meaningful solution feels so far out of reach. However, we rarely stop to reflect on the progress that is being made. This report is an opportunity to do just that, and for other cities that are suffering from gun violence to learn from us. This is certainly not to suggest that we are doing everything right or we don't still have a long way to go, as the mayor said. Gun violence is too common in our streets, and too many lives are being taken or ruined by these senseless acts. Just this weekend, 37 people were shot across our city, and 4 lost their lives. It is nearly impossible to fathom the number of people across Chicago who have been impacted by gun violence. But what keeps me hopeful is that there are advocates like CJAF and Ready Chicago and so many more who are here to do this work. And there are so many who have never given up. We should be encouraged by this scorecard. It shows that Chicago is making progress and that, as a matter of fact, we scored higher than 2.5 times the national average on our achievements in violence prevention programs, services, and policies. That is encouraging, that is progress, and that is hope. I have often said that there's just not one solution to the gun violence epidemic. We have to take a multifaceted approach to address this issue. This scorecard will help other cities learn from what works here in Chicago, like our outreach-based violence intervention programs, the youth and family violence intervention programs, our strategic workforce development programs, and our victim and survivor services. And hopefully, this scorecard will give us some new ideas from other cities too. In the meantime, I'm going to keep working in Congress to ensure that Chicago and every city have the resources they need to battle this epidemic. Soon, we're going to start seeing some of the fruits of that labor. This summer, as you know, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. On top of gun violence prevention laws, including my own work to eliminate gun trafficking, that new law includes $250 million for evidence-based community violence intervention work, like the work of CJAF, Ready Chicago, and so many other fantastic organizations. I am not going to let this be the end of our work. I'm still fighting to increase economic employment and educational opportunities for the people of Chicagoland so that less and less people turn to gun violence in the first place. Doctors are working to get better at treating gunshot wounds so that more people can survive. We're expanding mental health care resources to prevent suicides by gun and to help people recover from mental traumas inflicted by gun violence. So while we're happy today to be recognized for the work that so many across Chicago are doing, we are just using this as a little bit of fuel to keep our fire burning and to keep working to save lives. I am now going to hand things over to one of those people working to prevent gun violence, Jorge Matos, Senior Director of Ready Chicago. Jorge has been working in violence prevention for 17 years. He is a lifelong resident of the West Side, so he understands the gun violence landscape in Chicago and is working hard for healing. With that, Jorge.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name is Jorge Matos, also go by George, so you can do with that as you please. But I really want to thank the mayor, Mayor Lightfoot, Congresswoman Kelly, and Mr. Jackson here for inviting me today. It's a privilege and an honor. I've been on the ground in Chicago for almost 2 decades, close to 17, 18 years, and I've seen how our program and investments have gone up and down. And I really, really want to celebrate today and really uplift the scorecard and really talk about, like, I'm taking this to my team and folks that are on the street that need to know this, so they know that their work and all the hard work they're doing, those late hours, are for nothing. Ready Chicago is an evidence-based program. To evidence response to gun violence, focus on healing trauma and building opportunities for young men at risk. Launched in 2017, we have seen significant success among participants and our program growth in the last 5 years. We work towards safer communities by addressing trauma and increasing opportunities among men most likely to experience gun violence. A key to this is CBI, cognitive behavior interventions, helping people heal from trauma and respond differently. We work through community-based organizations to directly engage men at the highest risk and to connect them with mental health supports, paid transitional jobs, and professional development supports. I am a huge advocate for creating opportunities for our participants. And throughout my years of working in Chicago and being in the violence prevention field, I have seen with investments from the mayor and others that is happening now. And as a young man growing up in the West Side, specifically Humboldt Park community, that wasn't the case when I was growing up. Wasn't a lot of resources. There wasn't what is being built today. So I'm here again to thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Congresswoman Kelly, for advocating and being champions of this work. We are not even close to where we need to be, but I think we're on the road and we're heading in the right direction. And the index says that. I've traveled across different cities, and I am proud to say that when I go to LA or other cities, to say that I'm from Chicago and that we're doing this work and we're making an impact on the ground. Lastly, I just want to talk about collaboration and what's been going on here in Chicago. I think it's very unique, and I appreciate the collaboration. So I just want to talk about the investment in evidence-based interventions is critical, and Congresswoman Kelly kind of hinted to that. We're doing unique work that's evidence-based. So there's a lot of data, and this tells us that we're doing the right thing and we're headed in the right direction. Lastly, I just want to mention and thank some of our partners that are on the ground doing a lot of this work as well. We got NLEN in North Lawndale. We got UCAN, IMVC, CNH, CP4P out of Metropolitan, and Chicago Cred, and Heartland Alliance Ready Chicago. Without that being built and those collaborations, I don't think we will be where we're at today. So I just want to give a huge, huge shout out to all the folks across the city that are doing this work and believing in collaboration. Thank you very much.
All right, we're happy to take your questions.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Members of the media, Asha and I will bring down the mics to you. 2 questions for reporters. We'll start off with On Topic. Sarah Schulte from ABC. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, you say this is good news, and you also cited the data that homicides and shootings are down. Bottom line is, I know you've been asked this question before, but residents don't pay attention to the data, and they don't pay attention to a ranking like this. It doesn't really mean something to them if they don't feel safe. How do you, again, change the perception of people who live here who continue not to feel safe?
Well, I think the data is reflective of what's actually happening on the ground in communities. As I mentioned, when we stood up the CSCC, one of the things that was critical to the work that we wanted to do and what we've been able to accomplish now a year on is being in these communities. We picked 15 communities that were the biggest drivers of violence, over 50% of our violence. And what we're seeing is community buy-in, community leadership, community capacity building, literally on a block-by-block basis. So while certainly there's a lot more work to be done, and there are certain communities that have historically not felt the burden of violence that are feeling it now, and those residents, I think we still have work to do. But overall, across our city, I'm not just telling you what I think, I'm telling you what I know, because I'm in those communities. There's more work to be done, no question whatsoever, but people are starting to feel that difference. So yes, we talk about the progress, and that's important, that we not ignore that. But people are feeling it because they feel a certain ownership in it, and they see it happening in their communities. You take, for example, the West Side. We've seen significant 20-30% declines in shootings and homicides on the West Side, Area 4, which historically has been the most violent area of our city. We haven't seen these kinds of declines in a long time. And how do we get there? We get there because of the collaboration with people on the ground, all of the resources that I talked about that we are infusing in these communities, and residents are feeling it. Have we reached the finish line? Absolutely not. But people are feeling this, and I don't want to overlook that or underestimate it. And I just implore members of the media, report the numbers, because it does give people confidence that we are heading in the right direction. An 18% decline in homicides year over year, that's a big deal. And yet we never see that reported. When I go out into the community, I say, hey, how many of you know XYZ about what's happening in your community, what the numbers look like? Very few hands ever go up. But I need the media to actually report it. Be fair, report, call balls and strikes as you see it, but you've got to report the progress.
Maria, Univision.
I think she had a follow-up.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, I understand the shootings and homicides, but, there's other crime out there where people don't feel safe. Carjackings, armed robberies that are, you look on the Nextdoor website, you see those every single day. And I think it's not just, it's overall that feeling that people still have that they just don't feel safe.
But the feeling is also driven by perception. And the perception, if it's not accurately reported by the media, will continue to fuel the feeling that the entire city isn't safe. It is important for our residents to know that we have a plan that we have implemented that is showing progress, and it's critical that the media report that. As I said, call balls and strikes, talk about the areas where we still have to make progress, talk about the things that we need to improve on. Absolutely, that's fair game, but please report the progress, because that perception is also critically important.
Thanks, Mayor. Maria?
Good afternoon. This is Maria from Univision. I just came from the Little Village neighborhood. I spoke with some neighbors, and they're very concerned about the gun violence. Just last night, a man was shot to death in the back of the seat of a car. And I also spoke with Alderman Mike Rodriguez. He said that his district needs more detectives to investigate these homicides and more community programs. My question to you, Mayor, what is the city doing? What kind of resources is the city providing to this specific neighborhood, the Little Village?
Well, I read off a long laundry list in my opening remarks of the things that we are doing, and specifically we're looking at the communities that have had historic levels of violence, meaning decades, and Little Village is certainly one of those communities. I share the desire of the Alderman to make sure that we've got more resources. That's precisely why over the course of last year and this one, we've hired or promoted, I should say, 200 new detectives, and we look to do more. And I'm going to encourage the aldermen, when it comes time to vote for the budget that increases the amount of resources to the police department, that I hope we can count on his vote.
Thank you.
Amy Jacobson, 560 AM.
Good
Hello.
afternoon. Hi.
How are you?
Good. So Natasha
back.
Korecki, she's from NBC News. She's asserting that you're complaining about an ad on TV from the Peoples Who Play by the Rules PAC called the Safety Act. And she's claiming that you claim that this ad pushes a false narrative about Chicago. So what are the false narratives that are being
Well, first of all, it does a couple of things. It darkens my skin. I don't think there's any dispute that I'm African American, I'm black, and I'm very proud of that. So why do you need to blacken what I look like to send this ad out to suburban communities? So that in and of itself would be offensive enough. But what it's doing is it's fear-mongering. It doesn't recognize the fact that, in fact, we are down 18% in homicides. We are down 18% in shootings. And it shows black men, I don't know where from, I don't even know if they're from Chicago, who are violent and looting. It is the ultimate dog whistle being propagated in support of Darren Bailey. So we live in a time where it's real easy to talk about what divides us, to show the vigils of that. But what we should be doing, if we're actually talking about a vision for the future, where you want people to support you, how about talking about what's possible and how we bring people together? But to use the oldest racist tropes that there are to make the scary black woman even blacker, to show scary black men on TV, and to say to the suburbs, i.e. the white people, you don't want this coming to your town, so vote for Darren Bailey. That is a height of racism and cynicism, and we don't need it anywhere, certainly not in our politics, and we definitely don't mean it if we're going to try to bring people together and solve problems. I believe very strongly in regionalism. I have done that from the very beginning of my administration. We have so many things that we can work on together: transportation, water policy, the environment, and of course, public safety. But an ad like that is so offensive, it shouldn't even be part of the public discourse.
They claim they didn't alter anything,
Yeah,
and
well,
that video is all from Chicago. They got that video from news
prove that that's
stations.
not. We can prove that that's not true.
Okay, my second question, last question. Mayor, you talked about the shooting victims. What about off-duty Chicago police officer Danny Golden? He was shot on duty while breaking up a fight. Have you reached out?
He's actually off duty.
Oh, I'm sorry, off-duty
Yeah.
police officer. Got shot while breaking up a fight. Have you reached out to him or his family?
Our team has definitely reached out. I know that there was some confusion early on about what happened. What happened to him was absolutely horrendous. He was doing the thing that he should have been doing, and we're going to make sure that he is taken care of, because obviously he's going to have a very, very long road to recovery, and we want to make sure that his family is not negatively financially impacted. But the cowardice of the people who laid in wait for him outside of that bar, we need to make sure that those people feel the full weight of the criminal justice system and are held accountable for their crime.
Thanks, Mayor. Dane Placco, Fox.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there, how are you?
You talked about a number of various strategies and methodologies the city's using right now to combat violence. To what degree does the city look at the effectiveness of these various strategies? Are there some that you look at and you think are going to be great and don't work out? Or are there others that are more effective and you move more resources in that direction?
Well, let me talk about it from kind of historical big picture context, if I can. If you look back over, from the 1970s, say, to what the city's traditional response has been to spikes in violence, what we've done historically is throw massive amounts of law enforcement resources at it. Police, county, through the sheriff, state police, and also our federal partners. And what we know is it brings down the violence temporarily, but it never brings us lasting peace. You know, forever, people in Chicago have been talking about violent crime, long before I came to the city to live, but certainly in the 30-plus years since I've been here, it's on a continual cycle. But what we haven't talked about is how do we bring lasting peace to communities? And I think a lot of what this violence index is really focused on is exactly that. What are we doing to look at the root causes of the problem? And to me, a continuing thread in this is literally physical poverty. What do we do to make sure that we're not just being reactive to crime, but we're being proactive and preventative? We're looking at the trauma that communities are facing, and how do we infuse those communities with resources? As I mentioned, on my watch, we've increased mental health funding tenfold since 2019. So we are seeing, based upon, frankly, deep engagement with the community, that there are certain strategies that absolutely are going to be working. But fundamentally, what we want to do is make sure, A, that we're listening, and that meaning listening to the community, and that we're solving the problems that they want us to solve. If on a block you've got an abandoned house, or you've got a business that's a bad business, or you've got vacant lots, all of those things add up to a feeling. And going back to the point that I was talking about with Sarah, the perception that their lives are not their own, that they don't have agency under the geography under their feet, all of those things feed into people's perceptions that they are not safe. So if we address a number of those different factors as driven by the community, then I think the strategies are working. But what we know doesn't work is a law enforcement first and only strategy. We will never get to lasting peace. And importantly, we're never going to bring legitimacy to policing. We have asked the police over time to do way too much. And in my opinion, we set them up for failure when we haven't engaged with other partners who are better skilled, better able to address some of the things that are going on in communities that don't need a gun and a badge response. That's part of the reason why we funded, for example, alternative forms of responding. It doesn't serve anybody's purposes, for example, if someone's having mental health trauma, to put handcuffs on them and take them to jail. What we need to do is understand what's the nature of their problem. Are they on their meds? Do we need to get them to a mental health provider? So we've got to use different tools in our toolkits. And obviously, we're looking at the data to see, are we making progress? Are we reducing calls for service? Are we minimizing the number of people, for example, that are going to jail for mental health crises? Those are the kind of data points that we are looking at in conjunction with our community collaborators to see what works, and then we make the adjustments where we think, you know what, we need to move in a different direction. And importantly, there can't be one-size-fits-all strategy because the needs of communities are really very different. If you look at, for example, and I'm looking at Tamara, and I want to invite her to kind of step in and add to this. If you look at the 15 communities that we've been focused on, every single one of them is completely unique. What they need to feel safe is different. So we've got to have targeted strategies that fit the needs of the circumstances on the ground. Come on up.
I think, just to echo that, I think in terms of effectiveness, there's a couple different ways we look at that. First is we do have external evaluations on the programs that we're putting out that show us if they are effective. They do measure rearrest, re-victimization rates. They also look at connections and referrals because so many of these programs, all of them, in fact, are about connecting people to social services, mental health, housing, employment, and making sure that people have the resources necessary to sustain their life. But we're also looking at the effectiveness within communities. I think to the mayor's point, and even to that question about Little Village, when we go to a community now and we say, we're here, we want to sit at your table, we know every community is unique. It's not just every community, it's even down to the block level. And for example, in Little Village, where they have a specific problem with longstanding group lines, what are we doing as the city to support their hotspot focus? How are we supporting Enlace and New Life and Beyond the Ball to say, here's support for safe space programming, for youth programming, for increases in access to resources? And what we hear back in terms of the effectiveness is, we've never seen the city work this way before. We've never seen them come to us and sit at the table, and we're not perfect, but we've never seen that we can ask them for a resource that might be as small as tables and chairs for our event, might be as large as a coordinated departmental approach, a whole of government approach, and see that that works. And so over time, we measure our effectiveness not just in what we see in the people-based programs, but also in the place-based programs where we can actually measure violence reductions. I think ultimately in increasing that perception of trust with our community partners as well. Thank you.
Craig Wall. I'm sorry, Craig Dellamore, I'm sorry. Wrong last name.
I'm a little taller. Okay. Hi, Mayor.
I knew who you were.
One on-topic question, one off.
Sure.
And the first one for you and maybe Jorge Matos. What in the strategy addresses, and I know this isn't the right word, but I want to say the intensity of the violence. In other words, that it seems that the people who are committing these crimes are more willing, more able to use those guns, to fire at people, to turn and fire at police officers. It seems, even if there were fewer of them, that the ones who are out there are more deadly than they used to be.
Well, I think that's a great question. Look, none of this works if there isn't a certain level of accountability, right? As mayor, I have to be accountable to the residents of the city and particularly to the voters. And law enforcement, we need to be accountable to the people in the communities that we serve. The criminal justice system has to have a measure of accountability. And what we've seen, and you've heard me talk about this over and over again in the last year and a half, is the parts of our system are failing, and they're not doing what they need to do to hold people accountable. I've made no secret of the fact that I think there are too many violent, dangerous people out on the street. That is, to me, that is a fact. And we can do all these other things, but if there's not a measure of accountability, meaning people don't feel like they're ever going to be held responsible for the crimes that they commit, it will lead to more brazenness. I think, frankly, part of the reason that we're seeing some of the downturn is that people are awakening to the fact that there are too many people being let out on pretrial release that historically never would have been back out on the streets again. That is making people feel unsafe. That is adding to the perception that the city is dangerous and up for grabs. Because if you muster, I think about, for example, people that I've met in Little Village, some of the mothers who are afraid to walk down the street because they believe that certain gangs are running that community without any checks on them. If people believe that, because they then muster the courage to say, hey, so-and-so was the shooter, and then that person gets arrested, but then 24 or 48 hours later, they're back out on the street, what message does that send? It sends a message to those mothers in Little Village that we're not here for you. We don't have your back. But it also sends a message to the people that have been arrested that, a night in the county jail, just the price of doing business. And if we don't move those cases through the system so that there is a fair but speedy trial, that also sends a message. I think the wrong message. So I think some of what we're seeing is that. But look, fundamentally, I also do believe there are too many illegal guns on the street. There are just too many. We're fortunate enough yesterday to be in a conversation through the U.S. Conference of Mayors with the new, finally, permanent director of the ATF. And one of the things that we talked to him about was, we need you to bring resources to our community. We need you to continue the partnership with local law enforcement, because that I think is so powerful. Unfortunately, and it's really been true since I've been around law enforcement, there are some actors in our city who don't fear state prosecution, but they do fear federal prosecution. So we need to expand the opportunities for that message to be sent. Again, we can't arrest our way out of this problem, but if we're not using the tools of the criminal justice system to hold people accountable, we're going to continue to see the brazenness that I think you were alluding to.
And my off-topic question, because we haven't really spoken with you since the report of the Monuments panel. And obviously, the headline was what happens to the Columbus statues, but it's not just that. There are some other things that are recommended to be taken off of display, and there are recommendations for new monuments. What happens now to how much weight does that carry in what the city does going forward?
Well, I think one of the most immediate next steps is making sure that there's a process for further evaluation of some of the things that the committee has recommended. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I agree with everything that was recommended. I don't, and I've been pretty clear about that. But it's easier to say this should go, that should go, than make it happen. For example, the reliefs that are on the Fort Dearborn Bridge, easier to say, let's remove these because they don't accurately reflect the true experience of Native Americans in our country and in our city. But just the mechanics of doing that are very, very complicated. So I think the next step is really looking at, okay, if we're going to do these things, what is it going to take? What's it going to cost? What's the timeline? And that's the next step of that work. I am excited about the recommendations for new work. I do think that there's a dearth of work really memorializing the entirety of our history as a city, making sure that we've got images that reflect not only Native Americans, but that would be a big step forward. But we don't have a lot of monuments to women. We don't have a lot of monuments to other immigrants and refugees. We don't have a lot of monuments to African Americans. The people who have over history contributed in a positive way to the fabric of our community. There are so few memorializations of those historical figures, sung and unsung, that I think we have a real opportunity here. So I think there's a lot of good that's come out of that. I am deeply grateful for the really smart and innovative people that banded together to deliver thoughtful work, even though obviously there wasn't a universal consensus on what should happen. I think there's a lot of good that ultimately will come from it, and I appreciate the point. This is so much larger than whether there's a Columbus statue in Grant Park.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Isis, Bloomberg.
Hi, Mayor. Thanks for taking my question. I've just been back to Chicago for a week, and I've been hearing everyone talk about the crime.
Welcome back.
Thank you. And I've been looking very closely at the statistics, and to me, I understand where you're coming from when you talk about trying to, tackle crime from the root causes. But the one thing that I hear a lot that's making people feel insecure is that crime in the Loop is pretty significant and in this area. Is there also a plan to tackle crime in areas of Chicago that particularly hadn't seen as much crime in the past and have started to see it now, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I would just urge you to be careful with the words that you use, because saying significant to the Loop and River North compared to what people experience on the west side in neighborhoods like West Garfield Park or Austin, there's going to be an imbalance, and I think you're going to be missing a lot. However, having said that, if you haven't historically experienced crime and you're feeling it now, you're going to feel unsafe. And obviously we understand that. So we have done, I think, a lot. I think there's more that we can be done. So let me give you a couple of data points. For example, one of the things that we have found, not surprisingly, from our experience in other parts of the city, is that where we're seeing an uptick in shootings and in homicides is at night, between 12 and 5 p.m. So we started looking at what's happening in the Loop, and it's really more River North than it is the Loop, during that time period. Well, what we found out is we have a significant number of bars and restaurants that have extra hours liquor licenses, meaning that they can be open from 4 to 5 a.m. Well, I'm old school and remember what my mother taught me when I was a teenager going out. There is nothing good happening after midnight, particularly on a weekend, and particularly when you infuse alcohol and, in many instances, drugs. So we have to look at that, and we've been engaging in conversations with many of those late night liquor license folks to talk about what more we and they must do to make their establishments safe. Another thing that we're seeing, for example, is we're seeing crime happening in garages downtown, whether it's stolen cars being stored down there or things happening that escalate into violence downtown. That's another area that we're looking at, and looking at different levers that we can pull to make those garages a lot safer and not be repositories for stolen cars. So there's a number of things that are at work. One other data point that I found fascinating is that we're consistently seeing in the 18th district in the 1st district, so those are the 2 police districts that are on either side of the river, that 30+% of the people who are committing those crimes, meaning that are getting arrested for them, don't live in the city of Chicago. That was an interesting data point for me, and leads us to think about, well, what can we do to work with those communities on suburban Chicago, whether it's on the west side or the south side, to work in collaboration with them to address the issues that their residents are coming into our city and committing crimes. So yes, the short answer is, of course, we look at data from every part of the city. We measure it daily. We measure it week over week, month over month, year over year. I still hold a weekly meeting with the police department, which I'm going to be going to right after this press conference. But we are very focused on those areas of the city, particularly 1 and 18, as well as the 17th district and the 19th district. So those are areas of the city that have not traditionally seen the kind of violence that we unfortunately have seen for decades now on the south and the west side. We've got to make more progress there.
Heather, WTZW.
Hi, Mayor.
Hi there.
With the Monuments Commission, do you believe that any of the 13 monuments that they recommended be removed should be removed?
Well, as I sit here, I'm not coming to mind the 13, but I need to spend some more time with it. But as I said, the devil's in the details. And I want to make sure that we understand kind of the provenance of those particular monuments, meaning not just who was the artist or so forth, but why were they created, who commissioned them, and frankly, who in the city has a vested interest in those monuments standing. I think it's really important that we understand that for each of them. And then, of course, you know, as the mayor, I've got to be very fiscally prudent. I want to understand, what is that going to mean in terms of dollars and cents of getting them removed. Some of them are already, some of the 13, I believe, are already in storage. Others are out on display. But I think there's more work that has to be done, and there will be a working group set up to do that kind of next phase of the work.
In March, you told us that the Columbus statues would return to their pedestals. Are you prepared to recommit to that today?
I think what I said is I don't believe in erasing history, and I don't. But what I've also consistently said is, in particular with the statue in Grant Park, we have to have a safety plan that doesn't put anybody at risk. If you go back and look at the videotape from when that monument and the police officers were under siege, there were so many things that could have gone wrong from a safety standpoint. We had people trying to scale the thing. Imagine if that statue had tumbled over with people trying to scale it. We had our police officers under siege. I'm never going to put them in a situation where they're literally risking their lives over a statue. That's never going to happen. So until I see a plan, and I've been talking to lots of folks about what can we do, how can we do it, I have not seen or heard of a single plan that could allow these monuments to go back outside and keep everybody associated with them safe.
And on another topic, last week a Chicago police sergeant was charged for detaining a teen outside a Park Ridge Starbucks and has been relieved of his police powers. What went wrong there? Is there a failure of training? Is there a failure of supervision? I'm sure you've seen the video. Did he handle himself appropriately during that incident, in your mind?
Well, because that's a case that's under active investigation, I don't think it's appropriate for me to weigh in and put my thumb on the scale one way or the other. Obviously, the videotape speaks for itself, and the superintendent clearly felt like the officer's actions were serious enough that he was stripped of his police powers and is now on desk duty pending the completion of that investigation.
Yeah.
Two things, Mayor. The reimagining public safety that Springfield passed, $250 million going to groups like Enlace, Metropolitan Family Services, Puerto Rican Cultural Center. Can you talk about the importance of that money and how that will help your plan and sort of what the city is doing?
Well, I think it's already helping, and I appreciate the fact that the state has stepped up and understood that they've got to be our partners in this work. We have to make sure that all levels of government are focused on root cause analysis and making sure that we're strengthening data-proven strategies in the community and the providers of those strategies that make a difference. And you mentioned Enlace, and Ready, and I could go down the list, but these are organizations that are doing really impactful work that is demonstrated by third-party validators who are analyzing what they're doing and the impact. So I welcome the support from the state. The state provided, for example, I think it was a $10 million plus grant this summer to Chicago Public Schools for CPS and the programs run by Jadine Chow to really focus on the hyper at-risk individuals, to bring them back into the CPS orbit, to provide them with cognitive behavioral therapy, to get them mentors, to give them a job and a stipend, and then have a pathway for them to come back in school. Why is that important? Because the data is really clear. When school-age young people are involved in school and they are connected, they're far less likely to be victims, but they're also far less likely to be perpetrators of violence. So I think there's a big role that the state can and must play in our continuing quest to make sure that all of our communities across the state are safe.
Sort of a political question, but I think it matters to public safety. So today there was a news conference with Superintendent Brown, State's Attorney Kim Foxx. They were announcing charges for the suspect who ran over people with his vehicle. Afterwards, we saw Brown and Foxx shook hands. There was a hug. You know, we obviously pay attention to the optics. Can you talk a little bit about the work behind the scenes to get all of the people responsible for public safety on the same page? Couldn't help but notice Brown and Foxx were there together, and they had a nice moment afterwards.
And that's a good thing. As I said in answer to a different question, every part of the public safety ecosystem has to be working together. We may not always agree on every issue, but every part has to work together. We've got to open up lines of communication. We've got to find common ground where we can. And obviously the state's attorney is a very important actor. No charges are ever brought that the police department announces without the state's attorney's office agreeing and signing off on those charges. It makes sense to me that the chief prosecutor for our county would be standing with our police department as charges are being announced. So I think that that is a good thing. I'd like to see more of it, but it's a positive step in the right direction. And I think a recognition on all parts, and I'll just say to the Soup and State's Attorney Foxx that we are stronger when we work together. We are making our communities better when we all work together.
Aaron, Hyde Park Herald.
Thanks for having me. Can I ask Ms. Mahal a couple of questions, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I've been interested in writing about violence interrupter programs for a long time. I just found an article from last September from Vox, though, that was citing some reviews of research and individual studies that were really calling into question the effectiveness of these programs, period. And looking at the study that we're all here about today, too, it's really just kind of checking off whether initiatives and programs exist or not. Do we have any evidence from the city's perspective about whether these things are actually working? Or from the state, from the federal government, from the city, we're investing a lot of money into them. Mm-hmm. Do we have any sense of, research-wise, whether or not any of this is actually doing anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think first and foremost, there's been a number of research studies done. I've probably read every single one of them over the past 20 years looking at interruption programs. And every program's designed differently, they're operating differently, they're evaluated differently, and so you may see some differences in where those studies come in. I think importantly, the investment that the City of Chicago is making in CP4P, which is a network of 24 different outreach organizations, has a third-party evaluation that's being funded and supported to ensure that we do see an effectiveness coming out of it, and it's being conducted by N3. The evaluations of CP4P have actually shown, and we'll get you the specific studies, have been promising, have shown 30 to 35% reductions in rearrest and revictimization rates amongst their participants. And so we continue to evaluate and look at those studies where they're at, but I think we're going to have to get you the specific numbers of that. I would say just across the board, whether it's in victim services or other areas, that including the CPS programs that were mentioned, reentry, that evaluation is an incredibly important component of the City of Chicago's. We want to make sure that the programs are working, that the investments are serving the public's dollars, and certainly that if there are challenges, that we can pivot and look at new ways to approach and address them. And then the final thing I'll say, because we do talk quite a bit about evidence-based approaches, we're trying new approaches right now. Not all of them have been tested in the City of Chicago, but we see incredible basis for them in other cities. And so what we want to be able to do, whether that's vacant lot work, where we've seen tremendous impact in cities like Philadelphia or Flint, Michigan, we want to make sure that we can implement those in a way that's unique to the City of Chicago, but still relies on our partners, which is why I think it's so important for us to be here with folks like Greg to talk about what are other cities doing, what can we learn from them, and then yes, where we have success, like in Choose to Change, Safe Passage, which was created here in the City of Chicago, that can be implicated as a best practice moving forward.
Anything that CSCC can give me about effectiveness, I'd appreciate being able to report out, and that kind of thing. I can work with the press office. And I'm curious for the mayors also, how's Deputy Mayor Gottreich doing right now?
I'm sorry?
The Elena Gottreich, the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety.
Elena Gottrich.
Gottrich. I'm sorry.
That's
Terrible
okay.
of names.
And what was the question?
How do you view her doing the job and that kind of thing? What's she been doing? What's she bringing to the role and that kind of thing?
She's very involved in this work, and her team also does a lot of policy analysis for some of the initiatives that we're involved in. But there's also Elena directly managing and addressing the day-to-day challenges of the police department, the fire department, OEMC, and the Public Safety Administration. That is a full-time job in and of itself. And there's lots of things that, particularly as we head into the budget season, that we are working through with them. So she really runs point on kind of the day-to-day liaisoning with those different organizations. So she's got a very full and overflowing plate.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.